In this demo, we'll load the tennis booking application configuration directly from AWS. A cloud-based store is a great way to manage application configuration for cloud-native services. We'll begin by defining a configuration entry inside AWS Parameter Store, which we'll use to control the weather forecast section title. We'll add a NuGet package to our application and load configuration from Parameter Store. I'm logged into the AWS Management Console. From the Services search box, I'll search for AWS Systems Manager service. Systems Manager includes a feature named Parameter Store that we can use to store configuration for applications in the cloud. I'll choose Parameter Store from the menu. I have no parameters defined, but we can soon fix that. I'll create a new parameter within the store. Each parameter requires a name defined as a path to a particular parameter. We'll prefix the path with tennis bookings, allowing me to logically group application parameters. We're going to configure the forecast section title for the tennis booking application. This is defined within the Features section under a subsection named Homepage. When defining configuration in Parameter Store, // separate each path element. We can use this to define the hierarchical path to a parameter, in this case, features /homepage / forecast section title. We can provide an optional description for the parameter. We'll use the default standard pricing tier and, in this case, provide a string value with the data type set as text. We'll provide a title, and so that we can identify when it's being used, we'll suffix it with from AWS. That's everything we need, so let's click Create Parameter. Back in the tennis booking application, we'll add a NuGet package which supports loading configuration from AWS Parameter Store. This package is named amazon.extensions.configuration.systemsmanager. I've already configured my local development environment with credentials for AWS that will be picked up automatically by this library. Again, we won't cover the specific details of how to do that in this course. View the AWS documentation or courses here at Pluralsight for details on authenticating with AWS services from within .NET applications. We can now add the AWS provider to the configuration manager for our application using an extension method provided by the library. We'll use the Add Systems Manager extension method. We can pass a delegate to this method to configure our use of AWS Systems Manager. We must at least provide the path to the value we added to Parameter Store. We'll use the tennis bookings path. The AWS Systems Manager configuration provider supports optional reloading of values. We'll configure this to reload values after 10 minutes. When using the iOptions snapshot and iOptions monitor interfaces to access configuration, those will reflect the updated values from AWS if they're modified. This is an excellent way to avoid restarting production instances of an application purely to refresh configuration values. We're going to pretend that this is our production application, even though it specifies the development environment. I'll comment out this code in our program file so that Azure and AWS are added as configuration sources even during development. We can now run the application. When the home page loads, the title reflects the value defined inside AWS Parameter Store, proving that it's been loaded from that source. Each cloud provider includes services for storing application configuration values, often good choices for production configuration when deploying to the cloud. Would you agree if I made the statement that the default order of configuration providers fits all situations? I expect in most cases you would, but there are always edge cases in software development. In this demo, we'll learn how to control the order configuration providers are accessed to load configuration values. First, we'll clear the default order provided by the hosting defaults. We'll then establish a new configuration provider order for our application. The tennis booking application currently uses the forecast section title from the AWS configuration that we added a few minutes ago. Let's imagine a situation where we want to use environment variables as the final source for a final configuration value. We want these to supersede even the configuration loaded from AWS Parameter Store. Inside the launchsettings.json file, we'll register an environment variable for the forecast section title. However, if I run the application, the title still uses the value from AWS once the homepage loads. The web host builder adds the environment variable provider before our code, which adds the Azure and AWS providers. Configuration values have been read from environment variables before those loaded from the AWS Parameter Store. As a result, the values read by the AWS provider override those set by environment variables. In this scenario, we're forced to consider registering providers manually if we want to have environment variables take precedence. For now, I'll delete the code we added to register the Azure and AWS configuration providers. To control how application configuration providers are added, we can call a method on the host builder called configureAppConfiguration. We can configure this by passing an action that accepts a host builder context and an iConfiguration builder. We'll define this using an anonymous function. To allow us complete control over the providers used for this application, we'll entirely clear the defaults. We can access the current list of sources from the sources property on the iConfiguration builder. We can then clear the list to get to a clean starting point. I'll paste some code here that will register providers using our preferred order. Much of this is a copy of the code used within the default host builder, such as this section to conditionally load configuration from user secrets. For simplicity, I've also left some providers out, such as the JSON provider used to access environment-specific app settings files. The important part of the code is at the bottom. I've added the AWS Systems Manager provider to load from the AWS Parameter Store. After this, I added the environment variable provider. So now, when the providers are used to load configuration, because the environment variable provider runs last, its values override any set by previous providers. So if I run the application now, we can see that the title has a value loaded from the corresponding environment variable. Honestly, in the majority of cases, it's likely to be rare that you need to reorder the configuration providers. But if you do choose to clear the sources, you must remember to register all of the providers that are normally included by default.